Commander Hyunwoo pressed his finger against the cold metal surface of the observation deck as his ship drifted through the empty space around Sol 3. The planet below looked peaceful from this distance, wrapped in soft white clouds that hid whatever remained of the civilization that once lived there. His dark eyes reflected the blue glow of the planet as he studied the same data he had seen dozens of times before. "Still nothing, sir," reported Lieutenant Kayla, her green skin gleaming under the ship's artificial lights. She belonged to the Andorian Collective, one of the many alien species that made up the great galactic community. Her people had joined the stars 3,000 years ago, and she often wondered how different things might have been if the humans had survived their own mistakes. Hyunwoo sighed and turned away from the viewing port. As one of the few humans who had been adopted by alien families after Earth went silent, he felt a strange sadness whenever he visited this dead world. His adoptive parents from the Rigel system had raised him well, but he always wondered about his birth planet and the people who had once called it home. "The atmospheric processes are still running," he said, reading from his tablet, "but they're working at only 10% capacity, just enough to keep the air breathable for whatever automated systems are left down there." Kayla nodded and made notes in her report. Same electromagnetic readings as always. Lots of old radiation signatures from their atomic age, but nothing new. No radio signals, no spacecraft launches, no signs of active civilization. They probably destroyed themselves with nuclear weapons or climate change, just like 40,000 other species we've catalogued. The two officers stood quietly for a moment, looking down at the blue and green world that spun slowly beneath them. It was beautiful, even in death. The continents were still clearly visible, and the oceans sparkled with reflected sunlight. If you didn't know better, you might think it was still alive with bustling cities and busy people. "It's always the same story," Hyunwoo said sadly. "A young species discovers atomic energy, starts building weapons, damages their environment, and then—" He made a gesture with his hand, like something disappearing into smoke. "Gone. Another civilization that burned too bright and too fast." Kayla looked at her human companion with sympathy. She knew he took these dead world surveys harder than most officers. "At least they left behind some interesting technology," she said, trying to sound cheerful. "Our scientists learned a lot from studying their old satellites and space stations. Their computer systems were quite advanced for such a young species." Hyunwoo smiled weakly. "Yes, they were clever, maybe too clever for their own good. The Grand Collective, the great alliance of alien civilizations that spanned half the galaxy, had discovered Earth 300 years ago. Their first surveys had found a world full of electromagnetic noise, radio signals, television broadcasts, and the distinct energy signatures of a technological civilization. The aliens had been excited to make contact with a new species, but when they returned 50 years later with proper diplomatic ships, Earth had gone completely silent. The radio signals had stopped. The energy readings showed massive disruptions, consistent with global warfare or environmental collapse. Survey drones found empty cities, abandoned factories, and atmospheric processors working automatically to clean poisoned air. The collective's best scientists had studied the evidence and reached the same conclusion that thousands of other investigation teams had reached on thousands of other dead worlds. Humanity had destroyed itself during what galactic sociologists called industrial adolescence, that dangerous period when a species first gains the power to change their world, but lacks the wisdom to use that power safely. "Should we launch another probe?" Kayla asked, though she already knew the answer. They had sent hundreds of probes to Earth's surface over the centuries. All had returned with the same data: empty cities, clean but lifeless oceans, and automated systems maintaining a world without people. "No point," Hyunwoo replied. "Command only sent us here to update the navigation charts. This system isn't on any major trade routes, so it doesn't matter to galactic commerce. We'll file our report, mark Sol 3 as status unchanged, and move on to survey the next system." As their ship prepared to leave Earth's solar system, neither officer noticed the brief flicker in their sensor readings, a tiny anomaly that lasted less than a second. Their instruments recorded it as background radiation, a meaningless bit of cosmic noise not worth investigating. Far below the planet's surface, in vast chambers carved from solid rock and protected by technology that made them invisible to any known scanning method, millions of humans continued their patient work. They monitored every ship that passed through their system, analyzed every communication signal that crossed galactic space, and quietly maintained the careful illusion that Earth was nothing more than another tragic monument to a failed civilization. Dr. Lee Min-jun looked up from his control console as alerts flashed across multiple screens. "Survey ship departing," he reported to his colleagues. "Commander Hyunwoo, one of our lost children raised by the Rigelians. His ship's sensors performed exactly as we predicted." "Good," replied Director Park So-young from her position at the Master Command Center. "Another successful concealment. The galaxy continues to believe we're extinct, which means our real work can continue undisturbed." The truth was far more complex and wonderful than any alien survey team could imagine. Dr. Ji-hai sat in her chair 3 kilometers beneath the waves of the Pacific Ocean, surrounded by walls that seemed to shimmer and bend in ways that hurt to look at directly. The facility around her existed in more dimensions than most people could imagine, built using technology that humanity had developed during their long years of hiding from the galaxy. Her eyes were closed, but she could see everything. Thousands of images flowed through her mind at incredible speed. Ships moving between distant stars, alien politicians making speeches on worlds she had never visited, trade negotiations happening in languages her enhanced brain translated instantly. All of this information came from tiny monitoring stations that humans had secretly placed throughout known space over the past 800 years. "Ji-hai," a voice said beside her, though no one was physically there. It was Captain Minho, speaking to her through their quantum communication network. His body was actually spread across 17 different locations in the Rigel star system, watching and listening to everything that happened in that busy sector of space. "I'm seeing movement from the hegemony again," Minho continued, his voice carrying a note of concern. "Their battle fleets are gathering near the border with Vegan space. Looks like they're planning another invasion." Ji-hai's enhanced mind began working on the problem immediately. The hegemony was a military alliance of warrior species that loved to conquer new territory. The Vegas were peaceful traders who had never hurt anyone. If the hegemony attacked them, millions of innocent people would die, and the resulting war might spread to other parts of the galaxy. But humanity had learned long ago how to stop wars before they started. "How long before they're ready to attack?" Ji-hai asked. 6 months, maybe 7, Minho replied. "They're moving slowly, trying to make it look like normal military exercises." Ji-hai smiled. "That gives us plenty of time. Contact Mining Platform 7 and tell them to change course. I want them to create an asteroid field right along the hegemony's planned invasion route." "An asteroid field?" Minho sounded confused. "Make it look natural," Ji-hai explained. "Use debris from that old supernova in the area, scatter the rocks, in a pattern that looks like they've been drifting there for thousands of years. The hegemony's war leaders are very superstitious. They'll see it as a bad omen and postpone their invasion. This was what humanity had become after they almost destroyed themselves 300 years ago. The climate wars of 2157 had nearly ended human civilization, but the survivors had learned an important lesson. Sometimes the greatest strength came not from fighting, but from knowing how to prevent fights from happening in the first place. While alien species built bigger ships and stronger weapons to conquer the galaxy, humans had chosen a different path. They became invisible gardeners, quietly working to keep peace between the stars. They stopped wars before they started, helped young civilizations avoid dangerous mistakes, and maintained the careful balance that allowed all species to grow and prosper. The work was slow and patient, requiring people to think not just about today or tomorrow, but about what might happen decades or centuries in the future. It meant that most humans would live their entire lives without anyone knowing the important work they did. Suddenly, the air in front of Ji-hai began to shimmer, and Engineer Taemin appeared as a flickering image. His body was actually located near the center of the galaxy, but advanced quantum technology allowed his consciousness to travel instantly across the vast distances of space. "We have a problem," Taemin said, his image wavering slightly as data Streams interfered with his transmission. The ancient sleeper ships in Sector 7 are waking up. Jihai felt her heart skip a beat. For 800 years, humanity had been preparing for this moment, but she still felt a chill of fear when she heard the news. The ancient sleeper ships were older than any current galactic civilization. They had been built by a species that existed millions of years ago, during a time when the galaxy was very different. These ships were designed for one purpose: to consume entire solar systems and turn them into fuel for even more ships. The beings who built them had called themselves something that roughly translated as the Devourers, and they had nearly eaten the entire galaxy before some unknown catastrophe had put their ships to sleep. Since then, the sleeping ships had drifted through space like time bombs, waiting for something to wake them up. "How many ships are active?" Jihai asked. 12. "So far," Taemin replied, "but you know how they work. Each ship that feeds on a destroyed world creates 2 more ships. If we don't stop them quickly, there will be hundreds, then thousands." Jihai nodded grimly. Human scientists had studied the Devourer ships for centuries, using their advanced stealth technology to get close enough to examine the ancient machines without being detected. They had learned how the ships worked, how they reproduced, and most importantly, how they might be stopped. "Begin Protocol 7, Jihai ordered. "Contact all deep space monitoring stations and tell them to watch for more ship activations. And send a message to the Council. It's time to activate the quantum consciousness seeds we planted during the last Devourer cycle." Taemin's image flickered and disappeared as he returned his consciousness to his distant body. Around the underwater facility, thousands of other humans began preparing for humanity's greatest test. The galaxy's invisible guardians were about to reveal themselves at last. Admiral Yoon Seo stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching her worst nightmare come true on the main viewing screen. The thing that had just appeared at the edge of the Kepler 442 system didn't look like any ship she had ever seen. It was more like a giant crystal made of dark metal, 12 kilometers long and covered in strange patterns that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them. "What is that thing?" asked her second officer, Commander Raltek, his blue skin turning pale with fear. "Something very old and very dangerous," Yoon Seo replied, her voice steady despite the terror she felt inside. She had read the ancient records, the stories that most people thought were just myths. But now she was seeing the truth with her own eyes. The crystal ship moved toward the asteroid belt that surrounded Kepler 442's outer planets. As it got closer, the asteroids began to disappear. Not destroyed by weapons, but simply gone, as if the ship was eating them. With each rocket consumed, the alien vessel glowed brighter, and new sections began to grow from its hull like a plant sprouting new branches. "All ships, open fire," Yoon Seo ordered. Her fleet unleashed everything they had: plasma cannons that could melt through the strongest armor, quantum torpedoes that could crack a moon in half, energy beams that burned hotter than the core of a star. The weapons struck the crystal ship directly, lighting up space with brilliant explosions. When the light faded, the ancient vessel was completely undamaged. The weapons had passed right through it, as if it were made of solid space itself rather than normal matter. "Impossible," whispered Commander Raltek. "Nothing can survive that kind of firepower." But Yoon Seo knew better. The technology on that ship was millions of years old, built by beings who had mastered warfare long before any of the current galactic civilizations had even learned to make fire, while her people had spent thousands of years building better weapons. The ancients had learned to build ships that existed partially outside normal space, making them nearly impossible to destroy. "All ships fall back to defensive positions," she ordered, though she knew it wouldn't help. "Send an emergency message to Grand Collective Command. Tell them the Devourers have returned." Within hours, the bad news got worse. The crystal ship had finished eating the asteroid belt and had grown to twice its original size. Then it split in half, creating 2 identical vessels. Each new ship headed toward a different part of the galaxy, ready to consume more worlds and create even more copies of themselves. Reports began flooding in from across known space. Ancient ships were waking up everywhere, appearing from the dark spaces between stars where they had been sleeping for millions of years. Some were crystal ships like the one at Kepler 442, others looked like giant metal flowers, or spinning wheels covered in eyes, or geometric shapes that hurt to look at. But they all had the same terrible purpose, to consume everything in their path and use it to build more ships. On Proxima Centauri Prime, the capital world of the Grand Collective, emergency meetings were happening around the clock. Chancellor. Vextar, a large alien with 4 arms and red skin, pounded all his fists on the council table in frustration. "Where are our allies?" he demanded, looking around the room at representatives from dozens of different species. "The hegemony has the strongest military in the galaxy. Where are their battle fleets?" Councillor Zira, a graceful being with tentacles, instead of arms, checked her communication device with nervous movements. "They're falling back to defend their home systems," she reported sadly. "The Andromedans have closed their borders and won't let anyone through. The Vegan Confederation has gone completely silent. Everyone is retreating to protect their own worlds." "What about the smaller civilizations?" asked another council member. "Surely someone will help us." "They're all terrified," Zira replied. "The Devourer ships are spreading faster than we can track them. Every world they consume creates 2 more ships. At this rate, there will be thousands of them within a year." Chancellor Vextar collapsed into his chair, suddenly looking much older than his 800 years. "Then we're alone," he said quietly. "After millennia of building alliances and friendships across the galaxy, when we face our greatest threat, we stand alone." In desperation, the collective began broadcasting on every possible frequency, sending out a plea for help to anyone who might be listening. The message was simple. Ancient machines were destroying the galaxy, and any civilization with the power to help was begged to come forward. The message traveled at the speed of light to every corner of known space. It reached busy trade worlds, where merchants counted their profits. It reached military outposts where soldiers prepared for battles they couldn't win. It reached scientific research stations where brilliant minds worked frantically to find some weakness in the ancient technology. The message also reached a small blue world in an unremarkable star system, a planet that had been silent for 300 years, the world that the galaxy had written off as another failed civilization, another cautionary tale about the dangers of growing too fast. Earth received the message clearly, processed it through quantum communication networks that spanned the solar system, and analyzed it with technology that surpassed anything the collective could imagine. And then, just as it had for centuries, Earth sent back the same response it always gave to the galaxy: absolute silence. But this time, the silence meant something very different than what the galaxy believed. Admiral Yun Seo watched her tactical screen in complete confusion as something impossible happened before her eyes. The massive Devourer ship that had been eating the planets of the Tau Ceti system suddenly stopped moving. Its terrible weapons, which had been cutting through solid rock like it was made of paper, simply turned off. The spinning harvesting machines that had been consuming entire worlds retracted back into the ship's hull. "What's happening?" asked Commander Raltek, staring at his instruments in disbelief. "The ship just stopped." Yun Seo checked her sensors again and again, but the readings were always the same. The ancient destroyer that had been unstoppable just moments before was now floating motionless in space, its energy systems powering. Down one by one. "Admiral," called out her communications officer, "I'm getting reports from across the galaxy. All the Devourer ships are shutting down. Every single one of them." Yun Seo felt her heart begin to beat faster. Could it be possible? Were the ancient machines finally breaking down after millions of years? Had some unknown technical failure saved the galaxy from destruction? Then, space around her fleet began to change. The stars seemed to twist and bend, and suddenly ships appeared out of nowhere. Not the crude angular vessels that most civilizations built, but smooth, elegant craft that seemed to flow like water through the vacuum of space. They moved without any visible engines, gliding silently between the stars as if they belonged there. "Where did they come from?" Raltek whispered. "Our sensors show nothing. It's like they don't exist." But Yun Seo could see them clearly with her own eyes. The mysterious ships were beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, as if they had been designed by beings who understood the deepest secrets of how the universe worked. They carried no weapons that she could identify. but something about them made her feel very small and insignificant. A communication signal reached her ship, and a face appeared on her main screen. It was human, but not quite like the human she had seen in the old historical records. This being's eyes were deeper, older, as if they had seen things that normal people couldn't even imagine. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere, at once carrying sounds that made her bones vibrate. "I am Director Subin of the Sol Protectorate," the human said calmly. "We have been waiting for this moment for 837 years, 4 months and 16 days. The Devourer fleet has been neutralized." Yun Seo stared at the screen in shock. Humans. But Earth had been silent for centuries. Everyone knew that humanity had destroyed itself long ago, just another failed civilization that had burned too bright and died too young. "You're human," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But that's impossible. Your species went extinct 300 years ago." Subin smiled, and for a moment he looked almost sad. "We never went extinct, Admiral. We simply learned the value of patience. While the galaxy reached for the stars through conquest and expansion, we chose to become something else entirely." "But how?" Yun Seo asked, finding her voice again. "How did you stop the Devourers? Our most advanced weapons couldn't even touch them." "We didn't fight them," Subin replied, his expression becoming more serious. "Fighting them would have been pointless. Their technology is millions of years ahead of anything the current galactic civilizations have developed. Instead, we did something much more difficult. We infiltrated them." Yun Seo felt her mind struggling to understand. "Infiltrated them? What do you mean?" "Every Devourer ship carries tiny quantum consciousness seeds that we planted during their last activation cycle," Subin explained patiently. 2 million years ago, when the ancient machines last awakened, we were there. We had learned to travel through time, to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. We planted small pieces of our consciousness deep inside each ship's core systems. 2 million years ago, Raltek interrupted. "But humans only evolved a few 100,000 years ago." Subin nodded. "Linear time is a limitation we overcame long ago, Commander. When you can exist in 11 dimensions simultaneously, the past and future become just another direction you can travel. We've been playing a very long game, preparing for this moment across millions of years." Yun Seo felt dizzy trying to process what she was hearing. "You mean you've been planning this for millions of years, waiting for the Devourers to wake up?" "Not waiting," Subin corrected gently. "Working. Every day for the past 800 years we've been preparing. We studied the ancient machines, learned how they think, how they operate. We placed our people in positions throughout the galaxy, watching and guiding events to ensure that, when this moment came, we would be ready." Around them, the beautiful human ships continued their silent dance through space. As Yun Seo watched, she began to understand that these weren't just advanced vehicles. They were living extensions of the humans themselves, technology so advanced that it had become indistinguishable from magic. "The Devourer ships aren't destroyed," Subin continued. "They're simply sleeping again, their consciousness seeds activated to override their primary programming. They'll remain dormant until we decide otherwise." "Why?" Yun Seo asked. "Why? Reveal yourselves now? Why help us?" Subin's expression became warm, almost parental. "Because it's time, Admiral. The galaxy has grown enough to learn what we learned long ago, that true strength comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to protect." The Great Assembly Hall on Proxima Centauri Prime had never held so many different beings. At one time, representatives from 10,000 species filled the massive chamber, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors, shapes, and sizes. Some breathed oxygen like humans, others required special atmosphere suits. Some had tentacles, others had wings, and a few existed as pure energy contained in crystal shells. Dr. Na Young stood at the center of the hall, looking small and fragile compared to the massive aliens around her. But when she spoke, her voice, carried clearly to every corner of the chamber, automatically translated into thousands of different languages by the collective's most advanced computers. "You believed we were extinct because that is exactly what we wanted you to believe," she said calmly, her hands folded behind her back. For 800 years, we have watched you build your civilizations, fight your wars, and expand across the galaxy. While you reached for the stars through conquest and expansion, we chose a completely different path. The chamber fell silent. Even the delegates who didn't breathe air seemed to hold whatever they used instead of breath. We became gardeners, Na Young continued. Suddenly the air above the assembly filled with holographic images. Three-dimensional pictures showed events from across galactic history, but from angles that no one had ever seen before. The delegates watched in amazement as the true story of the last 800 years unfolded before their eyes. They saw the great HFY War fleet preparing to invade Vegan space, their ships loaded with terrible weapons. Then they watched as a perfectly natural-looking asteroid field appeared along their invasion route, forcing the warlike species to change their plans. What had seemed like bad luck was actually careful human engineering. Another image showed the deadly plague that had threatened to wipe out the entire Rigelian population 50 years ago. The delegates remembered how mysteriously the cure had been discovered just in time. Now they learned that human scientists had quietly placed the medical knowledge in Rigelian research databases, making it look like the aliens had found the cure themselves. Image after image revealed humanity's hidden work. 17 different galactic catastrophes that would have killed billions of beings, all prevented by subtle human intervention. Wars that never happened because humans had quietly influenced the politicians involved. Dangerous technologies that were never developed because humans had guided alien scientists away from certain discoveries. We could have revealed ourselves at any time, Na Young said as the images continued to play. We could have conquered the entire galaxy with technology that you are only beginning to imagine. Instead, we chose to serve as your silent guardians, making sure that intelligent life could grow and flourish throughout the stars. Chancellor Vextar, the four-armed leader of the Rigelian assembly, slowly stood up from his seat. His red skin had turned pale with shock. "But why?" he asked, his voice shaking. "What did you gain from staying hidden? What did you get out of protecting us?" Before Na Young could answer, the air beside her began to shimmer, and Director Jin Ho appeared as if he were stepping through an invisible doorway. His arrival caused gasps throughout the chamber. Most of the delegates had never seen quantum transportation before. "Purpose," Jin Ho said simply, his voice carrying the same strange harmonics that all the humans seemed to possess. "We learned that true strength does not come from the ability to take whatever you want, but from the wisdom to protect what matters. Not from the power to destroy your enemies, but from the patience to help them become friends." The assembled delegates sat in stunned silence as the full meaning of what they were hearing began to sink in. Humanity had evolved beyond the basic needs that drove most species. They didn't want territory to expand into, resources to exploit, or other civilizations to conquer. They had become something that had never existed before in galactic history, a species that found happiness in helping others succeed. Counselor Zira, her tentacles writhing with nervous energy, rose from her seat. "But this changes everything," she said. "If you've been guiding galactic development for centuries, then nothing we've accomplished is really ours. Our achievements, our discoveries, our growth as civilizations, it's all been artificial." Na Young shook her head gently. "No, Counselor. We never forced anyone to make good choices. We simply removed some of the obstacles that would have prevented you from making those choices. Your achievements are your own. Your growth is real. We were just the gardeners who made sure the weeds didn't choke out the flowers." The chamber erupted in excited conversations as delegates began discussing what they had learned with their neighbors. Some were angry, feeling that humanity had interfered in things that were none of their business. Others were grateful, realizing how many disasters had been quietly prevented. Most were simply amazed to learn that such a thing was even possible. Na Young waited patiently for the noise to die down, then spoke again. "We offer you a choice," she said. "We can return to the shadows and continue as we always have, protecting you from dangers you will never see. Or you can join us in this new way of living, a civilization based not on taking more territory, but on helping life grow wherever it appears." The debate that followed would last for months, but the galaxy would never be the same.